Hello everyone. On Tuesday the 22nd of September, Liz Truss finally, after several different ministers in the role, released the government's response to the Gender Recognition Act consultation. In today's video, I'll be discussing what she said and what was in the analysis of the consultation. After almost 2 years since the closure of the consultation and many toxic debates around trans people and their rights, a summer of protests after the leaked reports of a Tory plan to roll back the rights of trans people in England and Wales, we finally got the government's response to the long-awaited reforms to the GRA. I was tempted to do a special video as soon as it came out, but wow, am I glad that I let it simmer for a little bit. My initial reaction was that it was fairly positive. It certainly wasn't negative, but over the last week or so it has become less clear exactly how positive it actually was. So what was announced? First off, the biggest thing is that self-identification has, for now, been scrapped. This is despite 64.1% of the response agreed that there should be no need for diagnosis of gender dysphoria to get a gender recognition certificate. The British Medical Association, the BMA, also voiced their support for not needing a diagnosis of dysphoria last month, in September 2020. Yet, despite all this support, Liz Truss has declined to make this change, claiming that trans people and supporters had skewed the results of the consultation. And yes, trans people and their allies did respond to it. Of course they did. These were changes that affected them and nobody else. But so did people who opposed trans rights. Anyone who wanted to respond was given ample time to voice their opinion. I'll be going into a little more detail about those numbers towards the end of the video. She announced that the £140 fee for the gender recognition certificate would be reduced to a nominal fee. Didn't specify what that would be, but we'll take what we can get. To a lot of people this may not seem like a lot, but once you add in the costs of gathering in the evidence and postage, I've heard some people who have applied for this have provided evidence that's like 2 inches thick, so postage can add up quite quickly. A lot of trans people struggle financially. I touched upon that in my previous video, and a lot of people are forced to undergo expensive private treatments as access to NHS clinics is limited. So for some people this was a real barrier. They also stated that a lot of trans people that were responding to the consultation felt that access to healthcare was a bigger issue than those surrounding the Gender Recognition Act. And I'd have to agree. Access to healthcare in the NHS is more important to the day-to-day life of most trans people than changing your birth certificate. So Liz Truss has promised that there will be 3 new gender identity clinics by the end of the year. Now, it was not clear if she meant the clinics would be open by the end of 2020 or within 12 months of her announcement, and that waiting lists would be reduced to 1,600 by the year 2022. Now, my initial reaction to this was that it was great news. There's currently 7 gender clinics in the UK, and 3 new ones would give us an increase of 47%. However, it appears that this might not be as good as it all seems. On the 23rd of September, Marcia Di Cordova, the Shadow Women's and Equalities Minister, and the Tory MP David Mundell the following day both asked Liz Truss for clarification on this topic. She was asked whether these 3 new clinics were truly new, or whether they were the free trials that had previously been announced by NHS England in 2019. These free trials in London, Merseyside and Manchester are not gender clinics. The Merseyside trial, for instance, only offers counselling, which is available at the GICs, the gender identity clinics, but the other treatments that the clinics offer, such as hormone therapy, are not available in these trials. Liz Truss was unable to confirm either way whether it was these trials that she referred to or whether they were brand new clinics. These 3 clinics are desperately needed. In recent years, the waiting lists for these clinics have spiralled out of control. The NHS constitution states that patients should see a specialist within 18 weeks of being referred. The shortest waiting lists are estimated to be 2 to 2.5 years. Sheffield's Porterbrook Clinic, for instance, currently has a waiting list of 30 months. The problem is possibly most acute where I live in the southwest. I live in Cornwall, the pointy bit at the bottom of the UK. The nearest clinic to me is across the River Tamar around Dartmoor in Exeter. The Laurels is about an hour's drive away from where I live, which isn't too bad. The nearest clinic after that is Charing Cross in London, which is a 4.5-hour drive away. The waiting list at Exeter before COVID struck was at 60 months, almost 15 times longer than the NHS guidelines. A new clinic in Bristol would have a huge benefit to the trans community in the southwest. The statement made it clear that no changes would be made to the Equalities Act. This is welcome news, as the guidelines released before the Constitution stated, the Constitution focuses on the Gender Recognition Act 2004. We are not proposing any amendments to the Equality Act 2010. Several questions in the consultation asked whether amending the GRA would affect elements of the Equalities Act. But the consensus from most people was that since the Equalities Act was not being altered, it wouldn't be affected. The end of the statement, Liz Truss did feel it was necessary to highlight the Equality Act did have the authority to restrict services and single-sex spaces along biological sex when there is clear and justifiable reason to do so. I just want to point out, in the few cases where people have tried to do so with legal action, they have always failed. Perhaps the biggest outrage from this response has been the complete failure to recognise non-binary people. Last week we did see a court case, an employment tribunal, that recognised being non-binary or gender fluid is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. This was the perfect opportunity for non-binary people to be recognised, to be able to get something to show legally they are who they say they are non-binary. I'm not non-binary, so I'm not best placed to give a personal reaction to this, which is why I reached out to some of my NB friends to get theirs. One said, "We had a lot of support and still were seen as either confused or what I feel as non-existent. 64.7% of the responses were in favour of amending the GRA to give non-binary people the recognition they deserve. To force them to put their gender down as one or the other in order to apply for services is cruel, especially when this is then turned on them to try and make it out that their identity isn't genuine." Predictably, there were a large number of responses that stated non-binary people don't exist, and that there were only two sexes, and that was a biological reality. These people clearly have never heard of intersex people. I just quickly wanted to talk about some of the notes the researchers from the University of Nottingham made about the responses to the consultation. As well as being able to respond through the government website, which is how I and 36% of the people responded, 3 campaigns hosted responses too. Stonewall, the LGBT advocate charity, had a form on their site to respond. Stonewall did give guidance on how to respond, but participants were free to respond how they liked and to type in their own answers. Some questions were less visible than others, but could be reached through drop-down boxes. Stonewall responses made up 39%. Level Up, a feminist organisation, took a similar route to Stonewall, but simplified certain elements by combining some questions together. They made up 7% of responses. Fair Play for Women were the last campaign to get involved. They accounted for the last 18% of responses. Their responses consisted of pre-filled answers that respondents couldn't alter on their site. All they did was put in their personal information to the form and send it off. A very small number, 2% of these, did download and alter the template responses before sending them off themselves. This government has accused trans people and their allies of skewing the results of the consultation. We have no way of being certain how many trans people actually responded to it, thanks to some non-trans people answering the questions that were only for trans people. Liz Truss said that 7,000 trans people responded. The researchers who did the analysis put the top-end estimate at 12,000, so it's 7,000 to 12,000 trans people responded. Yet we know that the Fair Play for Women, an anti-trans group, in case you weren't aware, accounted for 18,370 identical responses. Yet we're the ones who are being accused of skewing the results, with personal and individually answered responses. The more time that goes on since the response, the more certain I am the government is trying to do the bare minimum it can in order to placate the trans community and our allies. The action they've taken has the lowest approval rating, only 58.5% out of all the questions in the consultation. The ones with a far higher approval rate have been ignored. The great news that seemed to be the case initially seems to be nothing more than what was already in motion, with Liz Truss being unable to answer a simple yes or no question on whether these new clinics are actually new. There is news coming out right now that there are members of the Conservative Party that want to weaponise the bad feelings about trans people in some kind of culture war. I mean, that's not really news, we knew that there were some. To try and use the hate that certain notorious novelists are whipping up, to try and solidify their base after the horrendous performances around Brexit and the pandemic. That oven-ready deal all of a sudden ain't looking so great, is it, Boris? But the good news is that we have allies, even inside the Tory party. MPs such as David Mundell and Crispin Blunt are speaking out against Liz Truss's actions. We have seen exactly what levels of support we have from the British public through the consultation. The massive rates of approval, despite the vitriol with which some of the British media have come after trans people with over the last couple of years. We've seen the support that we've gotten at protests over the summer. On Wednesday this week, we saw an open letter released, which 200 literary professionals signed, throwing their love and support behind us. By Thursday, that had grown to 1,500. We know that love will win out in the end, and we know that we have not seen the last of the pushes for reforms to the Gender Recognition Act. In fact, this morning, I received an email regarding the petition for reform to the GRA. The petition had received enough signatures and will be debated in the House of Commons. So, if you're in the UK, please write to your MP and urge them to hold the government to the results of the consultation. Liz Truss claims that the UK is world leading in LGBT+ rights. Yet we lag behind more than 20 other countries for trans rights, and our overall ranking is slipping. Thank you to each and every one of you for your support. The fight is not over. It may take time, it may take another government, but we will keep pushing for our rights. We could not do that without you. Thank you for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If I have earned it, I would love if you could give it a like. Please consider subscribing. I do want to move on to happy, positive topics, but unfortunately there are still some less than positive topics which I feel I do need to address. Please put any feedback into the comments below. I do appreciate some of you contacting me directly with your views, but the engagement below really helps push the channel forward. And I really love reading them and replying to them. Until the next video, goodbye.